It's about history. It's about preservation. It's about sense of place here on Eastern Long Island. With Esperanza Leon, I'm Irwin Levy, and this is Our Hamptons. Esperanza, good morning.
Hello, Irwin.
You know, Esperanza, if you look at the mission of Our Hamptons podcast, honestly, preservation is really right in it. With our deep, incredible respect for the sense of place we have here, this really ties in perfectly with our two special guests. I was really going to banter a little bit because one of our special guests really gave me a zinger in a good way, but I think I'm going to save it for the episode when we start talking to him. But without further ado, I'm going to introduce these people separately and then bring them both out. We have the executive director of the East Hampton Historical Society and someone I personally have collaborated with on numerous events through my other hat of East Hampton Trails Preservation Society. That would be Steve Long. Welcome to you, Steve. And on the other side, we have, dare I say, really, Esperanza, an East Hampton legend, an East End legend. I mean, we're going to pour it on you, and that would be the beloved Mr. Hugh King. So, welcome to both of you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, we have really a couple of storylines we're going to talk about because obviously 2026, which is right around the corner, is the 250th anniversary birthday of our
I
country.
say
Yes,
it? May I
please
say
do.
it? Because I've been practicing this so much. I love saying it now.
Please do, Esperanza.
It's the semi-quincentennial.
Wow.
I finally got it down. It's half of 500. You understand this, right? It's great. I love this.
I'm definitely not going to repeat that because I will botch that up.
It took me a month to do that.
I will annihilate that. So that's not going to happen.
250th coming up, big year.
Wow. So why don't we get right into it now? 250 years of history, 250 years of our country, and Steve, let's talk specifically for the East Hampton Historical Society first. Look, you guys put together tremendous events when it's not a whatever that word Esperanza just used. So you did that in normal years. Are there big plans to celebrate America's birthday for 2026 via the Historical Society, Steve?
Well, we have three big initiatives that we're planning. First and foremost, we have the home of one of East Hampton's leading patriots, Colonel David Mulford. And we're going to be restoring the interior of the house back to what it looked like in the 1770s. And this is actually going to be the first comprehensive restoration of the building's interior since the Historical Society acquired it in 1948. So it's a real opportunity for us to not only help celebrate and commemorate the 250th, but really steward this property, hopefully for another 100 or 250 years.
Wow.
So that's first and foremost. And then we are working on a podcast. Back in the bicentennial, there were these bicentennial minutes, which were really terrific. So we're sort of jumping off from that concept to create this month in 1776 to tell the story of what was happening here locally in East Hampton in the lead up to the American Revolution and then through the year, so that you'll find out not just what was happening in Brooklyn or Valley Forge or Trenton or places like that, but right here in our own backyards.
So the objective is to really keep this hyper local. Am I correct? To really, make it really East Hampton town centric.
Yes, because in my opinion, East Hampton was kind of marginalized 50 years ago when there was the American bicentennial. We had here in our community the sort of equivalent of the Minutemen that marched to Lexington and conquered. They mustered to Brooklyn. Unfortunately, George Washington lost the Battle of Long Island. So that's a story that really never was celebrated in American history. And so the soldiers, including David Mulford, that marched west, there wasn't a marathon that was created to help celebrate that on the day that they were mustering west. So, here's our opportunity to say that, this is a really important part of the American Revolution. And just because the Americans weren't the victors doesn't mean that we should talk about it and learn about it any less than we do with Saratoga or Trenton or Concord or Lexington or anywhere else that we had these patriot victories.
And this is something that precisely Irwin and I in our conversations, we were talking about this, and it led to having you both on the podcast, because I'm remembering my upbringing in East Hampton and thinking, boy, do I wish we had had more of a context of learning our US history through local individuals or local situations or anything that had happened, and then putting it within that context. And I feel like that's what you're saying now you're going to be doing, is sort of highlighting these persons and situations from that time period, and contextualizing them within the greater history of the United States.
Yeah, and part of what we want to do here today, and we're going to sort of tie it in all together. Steve, we are going to continue to discuss what the Historical Society is bringing, but also I want to bring Hugh King in here. And Mr. King, you were an educator. I know you taught at the Spring School for many years. And as a teacher, was part of the curriculum, and Esperanza, as the parent of the two school-age children, we're going to ask her to chime in. Mr. King, how much local history did you impart to your students, or did the school focus on imparting to your students? Because this is something, Esperanza, I talk about all the time, how much amazing local history there is here.
Well, what happened is in the junior high, every year in the seventh and eighth grade, Fred Yardley and Ophelia Harris had the seventh and eighth grade students write a term paper. And it always had to be a term paper about some aspect of Springs history. Unfortunately, while I was teaching, there was no emphasis on local history until I retired. And then I went back into the school, into the fifth grade, and I taught them about Springs history. And then when the school said they didn't have time to pay me anymore, what I did is I had a class for the teachers. So we set out a whole curriculum of local history in Springs. What happened to it after I left, I don't know. But I've been encouraged that Ray Watusiak, a seventh grade teacher at the Springs School, has started teaching Springs history to the children. Also, Steve can tell you about what the Historical Society does with the John Marshall School and the Amagansett School and the Montauk School.
And it's so important what you did and have done and continue to do. And Steve, I do know about the programs you have with the schools. And it's not to say, I remember taking my field trips from John Marshall, going to Home Sweet Home, to Mulford Farm, to Clinton, all of that. I do remember doing that. But the older I got, like in middle school, it seemed like that became, well, it just wasn't in the textbooks, let's put it that way. Or if it wasn't in the textbooks, it wasn't the teachers complementing the textbooks with that local history.
Steve, maybe you could elaborate more on that, because I didn't really realize that it was to this extent. So could you tell our audience what you're doing with the John Marshall School, as you was talking about?
We have been working with pretty much all of the schools here in East Hampton town, and are eager to work even farther west, and have made some inroads there too. But the terrific thing about American history is that any aspect of it can be examined through the lens of East Hampton. So if you're interested in sort of indigenous cultures, you could look at that through East Hampton. We were talking about the American Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, the Civil War, the
Emancipation.
emancipation, immigration, whatever it is. You could study it, Western migration, Western expansion, through the way that artists like Thomas Moran, whose studio and home we interpret at the Historical Society. You could look essentially at any aspect of American history and just do it here in East Hampton. You don't have to go to New York City. You don't have to go anywhere else in the country. You can do it right here in our own township.
Steve, what about that whole scenario you wrote for the Mulford Farm that I read on the app?
We have a great way of introducing kids to and grown-ups too to sort of this interesting story that happens in my opinion of Mulford Farm is that we have the home of the Mulford family, generations that lived in this one house during the American Revolution. Colonel David Mulford was the head of the local colonial regiment. He commanded 700 troops and one of the leaders of the Patriot cause, also was one of the community's largest slaveholders. So he illustrates what we see at Monticello, what we see at Mount Vernon, what we see at so many of the homes of these leading patriots, that how is it that they are espousing support for freedom and liberty, but they're engaging in chattel slavery, and that they're the biggest proponents of chattel slavery in their communities. 50 years ago, Edmund Morgan wrote a book called American Slavery, American Freedom, where he examined that in Virginia. But here we have the opportunity to examine how that same paradox plays out in our own community in a northern state, in East Hampton, which is so surprising to people because I was giving a tour of Mulford Farm yesterday to folks who were from Kansas. They were so unfamiliar with slavery in the North. To them, slavery was a Southern thing, and when was slavery abolished? They wanted to know the full story because they hadn't been taught about it when they were going to school.
Yeah. And, I say, by the way, I love that line. I mean, I wrote it down. I thought it was in Esperanza. This was really just sums it up so perfectly how any aspect really of our history as a nation can be learned and viewed through the lens of Eastern Long Island. That's extraordinary. And Mr. King, certainly.
Let me say something. Hold on. I wanted to build on what Steve just said. We can now go into the South End Cemetery and see South End Cemetery and who's buried down there, but the Colonel David Mulford that he's talking about. Also, Samuel Buell, who was the minister during the American Revolution, is buried there, and other men who served in or had something to do with the revolution are buried in that South End Cemetery, so that there's an experience of a tour.
Exactly. And you see, you stole my thunder, you from giving you this enormous buildup of how you actually bring all of this to life. And, we, Esperanza and I talk about this all the time on our Hamptons podcast, how history is terrific, but how do you bring it to the public? And it can be brought to the public really effectively by telling a story. If facts are easy to find. We can pull out our phone and get a fact, right, Esperanza? But you have a guy like Hugh King, who I've been on a ton of used tours. I'm sure you have as well, Esperanza. And you brings it to life really. And Steve, is it fair to say by storytelling? Yes, of course it's fact-based, but it's by telling it and relaying it to the public as a story. I've taken that tour you does with the lanterns at night.
Yes, exactly. It's a compelling story, but it's also even more compelling because you're in the place.
Yes. Yes. And that's the whole point at which history is very circular. It goes back to Steve's point, how all of this history can be viewed through the lens through an East Hampton lens, which is extraordinary. And
so can I ask though, because you just mentioned a few of the men who were so a part of this history that we're discussing right now for next year for the semi-quincentennial. I have to say it again.
Oh, wow.
wow, my God. Esperanza, I'm going to run that. I'm going to run that. I'm going to be running that on a loop because it is really
right,
impressive.
I'm so
exactly.
curious to know if you're exploring, if you've come across in your research, both of you, either of you, any unknowns, like people that maybe weren't explored or highlighted in the past, or that you just suddenly found a history that you think, wow, this really is worth exposing for this celebration of the United States of America. Has there been anything like that? News stories.
At Mulford Farm, what I found so fascinating is that there was always sort of an understanding that, maybe there were enslaved people that may have lived there, and maybe they were servants, or clear from there was a census of Suffolk County that was done in 1776. And according to that census, there were 8 members of the Mulford family that lived in that house, along with 8 African Americans. And they were almost certainly enslaved based on other documents related to the Mulfords at this time. And to me, that's so fascinating that, that the house, it's a traditional salt box structure. It's, as people say to me, it looks bigger on the inside than it appears on the outside, but it's not a gigantic mansion. And to imagine there were 16 people living in this house, and understanding the lion's share of the work that was done on that property, both in the house and on the farm, was almost certainly done by enslaved people. Some of the names through the Plain Sight Project, we've been able to identify, like, Rose and Abigail, some of the enslaved women who were there, or Sharper, Prince, Jack, enslaved men who were probably milking the cows that were on site, that were bringing in the firewood, that were bringing in the water, who were cleaning, who were working the fields. And I think that's a story that really has not been traditionally presented at places like Mulford Farm, and certainly not in East Hampton. But it's not just a story that happened there, but it was happening all over East Hampton, because there was a significant number of enslaved people, but especially in the 17th century, who were establishing the wealth of this community early on.
There are a couple of things that happened because of the American Revolution that sometimes we forget. There's something that the trustees have something called the Rysam account. William J. Rysam came here after the revolution from England. And he came here because he wanted to send his daughters to Clinton Academy. Okay? The other story is that what happened to many of the Montaukets after the revolution left, Sansom Arkham took them up to Oneida and that's as a result of the revolution. And Governor Clinton, when Clinton Academy opened up, he came down here and gave the bell. Steve is going to correct me if I'm wrong. And one of the reasons he was interested in Clinton Academy is education had fallen off during the American Revolution. And he saw this as a resurgence of education. That's why he was so interested in that. And this is all the result of the American Revolution. So we don't only have to talk about what happened during it. We need to talk about what happened before in East Hampton.
Yes.
And then what happened after.
That's a very good point.
Esperanza, I guess we have to describe Mr. King as actually acting out for us and putting on period era haberdashery, if you will. And we do greatly appreciate that. Maybe at one point when we come into actually videotaping and putting these things live, of course.
Also, you got to be careful. I used to be an actor. So I sound like I know what I'm talking about.
You are.
What is this used to be, please?
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Used to be. Yeah, right.
Yeah, exactly. This is a performance right now. I mean, I don't think we could. I don't think we could doubt that.
I'm thinking about your description, Steve, and yours, Mr. King. I I can't, I can't help but my mind goes back in time and I start thinking, well, what were those slaves on the Mulford farm? Did they keep things going during the Revolution? Like what was, obviously this is all speculation, but
Hmm.
it does tell a story of the place also. Like, okay, so David Mulford went to fight. All these people, all these men left. Who was left to actually take care of things?
Well, but the other thing about what you just brought up, this plain sight project has brought
Right.
this to the light. For example, Nathaniel Dominy didn't build the Hook windmill. He had it built and he designed it and he worked on it. Well, who went over to Gardiner's Island, cut the wood, brought it to fireplace, and brought it up to where the Hook mill is today? I think they say Josiah Hobart built the Mulford House. No, he didn't. He had it built. Well, who built it? And we're finding, or we're thinking, that the many enslaved people built so many of these buildings in our early history. And then David Rattray in the Plain Sight Project said, if you had a street named after you in East Hampton, you
Right.
probably owned slaves.
And Esperanza, so after the Battle of Long Island, this East Hampton and all of Long Island, including New York City, occupied by the British. Here in East Hampton, there are about 150 heads of household who fled as refugees. And I think that's another really fascinating
Yep.
story about the American Revolution. You learn about how even today refugees fleeing war zones, and David Mulford was one of the first refugees. He was, as the colonel of the colonial regiment, really one of the leaders of this community's effort to support the patriot cause. So the British are certainly wanting to get kind of control over him. He was forced to take the oath of allegiance to King George III, as essentially all men in East Hampton were. But he fled in September of 1776 to Connecticut. And as I mentioned, about 150 other men followed suit. And what happened when these heads of household left? We're starting to research that, but we do know from examples in Rhode Island and other parts of the Northeast that, as you were referencing, the enslaved workers were the people who ensured that these farms continued to operate even after the master was gone, either fighting or in hiding or what have you. But I also find fascinating about the Mulford story is that the lore was that, oh, the whole family escaped and they went to Connecticut.
Hmm.
But there actually is a list of the number of vacant households in East Hampton in like 1778. And there's only maybe 6 or 8 of them. So it very rarely did the whole family leave. And from the records that we have, we know that it was just Colonel Mulford who departed from the Mulford family. He took his horse, he took 13 cattle, and he took a passenger who we've been able to determine, we're pretty sure of this, it was an enslaved African named Jack who was departed to Connecticut with him. The Connecticut Department of Safety about 6 months later approved Jack's return to East Hampton. And I think because his work was needed on the farm to help support the family and the rest of the household.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, Esperanza, the Wainscott Heritage Project, okay? There are
Wow,
two
he's giving you
books.
a plug, Esperanza. You hear? This is unbelievable. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, there are two books that we need to look into, Memorials of Old Bridgehampton and Sketches of Local History. And in there, we might be able to find some aspect of the revolution that occurred in Wainscott, okay? And then the Trails Preservation Society, there was a great story about this guy, Jonathan Dayton. They were worried that the British ships were off Montauk. And of course, they were after the cattle, the sheep, and the horses. So what Jonathan Dayton supposedly went down to Montauk with a small group of men, and he went up over the hill, and then they went down again. They changed their coats and looked, and then they went back up. They went back and forth, back and forth. indicating there were more men than there were really there, and then the British left. That could be a Trails Preservation Society if we could find a route.
Mr. King, you and I will have a sidebar about that in the near future. But I
Okay.
just want to,
Fascinating.
that is fascinating. I'm going to leave that aspect there because we really do need to start wrapping up. 2026, East Hampton Historical Society, and Mr. King, I know, is going to play a big part of it. And Steve, is there, again, in the few minutes we have left, what are some of the things you could just touch on briefly that you have in the works? And I know it is a
Let-
work in progress.
Okay, I'll go first. Okay, Steve?
Please do.
Okay, what I plan to do is to go, Steve pointed this out, the East Hampton Town Board and the East Hampton Village Board lets its local historians speak first at every single meeting. So what I'm planning to do, of course, is to go to every town board meeting and every village board meeting and talk about some aspect of local history. Okay. The other thing is LTV now has a local news show on once a month, Christine Sampson. So I'm planning to go on there and talk. So between the podcasts that Steve has been scheduling and doing this, we can get at least some of these stories out there. I mean, that's what my plan to do, and maybe do a cemetery tour of the South End Cemetery, talking about some of the people in there who were involved in the revolution, including singing the Ballad of Pudding Hill. And I'm going to leave you on that one.
We may be recording you doing that for Instagram, but we'll put that on the back burner. And Steve, and again, to our audience, I can't give enough props for what East Hampton Historical Society does all year. With East Hampton Trails Preservation Society, we've done a ton of collaborative events, which are just so well received. There's stuff going on really, it seems like morning, noon, and night, 12 months a year with East Hampton Historical. So Steve, really, this community owes you a real debt of gratitude for all you've done, and to Mr. King as well for his tours. But what do we have going on specific for 2026? Give us the short list, if you will.
The East Hampton Historical Society, we're planning this restoration of the Mulford House.
Right.
We are going to be doing a podcast and then planning a history festival. The last time we did our history festival, it was for East Hampton's 375th.
Right.
It was so well received that people wanted us to do it every year, but I was like, whoa, let's be a little more choosy about when we do it. But I think having the opportunity to have a festival at Mulford Farm in the fall of 2026 will really be a wonderful time for us to kind of commemorate 250 years of the United States of America. I did want to circle back though on something. There's a great book in Tim Breen's book, Imagining the Past, East Hampton Histories, where he says in East Hampton they take their history very seriously. And he means it as sort of a pejorative, but I won't get into sort of what there could be a whole podcast about his book. I don't know of many other communities that every town and village meeting starts off with history and that historical perspective. East Hampton Village appointed Jeff Erickson as chief of police. Hugh got up and spoke about East Hampton Village's first chief of police. And over again, whatever issue that the town is confronting, Hugh provides that historical perspective. And I think there is no better, that there's nothing more special than a community that says, hey, we're dealing with issues that have been dealt with for 20 years, for 200 years. And how did our community deal with this issue in the past? Let's ask our historian to provide us that perspective, because as to kind of paraphrase historian David Thielen, the past is a reservoir of possibilities for the present, and how special it is that our community recognizes that.
Yeah, I think that's really very well said. It's really probably symbolically a good place to wrap it up as well. Yeah, this place does have a deep respect for its history, and really, we have people like Hugh King and Steve Long in a great way to talk about that Esperanza, and along with a great philosopher who uses the term history is circular. But
Well, you're keeping history alive, which is really what needs to happen because it grounds people and keeps it real, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it can provide reassurance, which is sort of paraphrasing what you just said. It provides the reassurance that this is not the first time we're experiencing this.
That's true, and especially in a place that we see the rapid changes. But
Right.
you could
We've
always
seen this before. We got through it. We're still here.
exactly.
Let's keep going.
Exactly. Hugh King and Steve Long, really a sincere thank you to both of you gentlemen for appearing on our Hamptons podcast. Much appreciated. And Esperanza, as always, a pleasure.
Yes, it is. Until next time.
Until next time. Thanks so much for joining us. New episodes of Our Hamptons are released every other Tuesday. Find them wherever you get your podcasts.